Senator.
Okay, all right, thanks, Chair. Well, I want to start with forest products, plantations and regional forest agreements. So.
Now, could I just put it on the record that Mr Thompson has approached the table having broken his leg by a bicycle accident. So there you go. Welcome back.
Thank you, Senator. And if I was a horse, someone might have shot me.
That's what they say about me.
Okay, so look, I just want to start asking about plantations and just in general to ask about initiatives and programs to be supporting plantation wood production that the government currently has underway.
Ian Thompson, First Assistant Secretary, Sustainable Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. Outside of our natural resource management programs and the support that is available within them for farm forestry, I don't think we have any direct programs supporting plantation forests at the present time. Plantation forests clearly have opportunities for participating in carbon programs, and plantation forestry is an area where significant research is being undertaken by the relevant R&D corporation.
Okay. I mean, given the failure of the MIS schemes, of which the Senate inquiry into that is about to conclude and report, is there any plans or any prospects of ongoing other programs that could potentially support both existing plantation, better use of the resource from existing plantations, and potential further expansion?
In terms of the future programs, that'll be a matter for the government. There are no current programs, as I said, being planned. In terms of more efficient use of plantations and forest timber, again, the major activity in that area is in the research field, where the RDC is doing work to improve timber utilisation management and those sorts of things.
What is the relevant RDC?
Forest and Wood Products Australia.
Yep. Okay, and how much is that supported by government?
It's like the other RDCs, and there is a levy that is paid by industry. I haven't got the numbers with me at the moment, but the government does support it. I think the RDC has a total budget of around 9 million, so something 9 or 10 million, so around 4 or 5 million. But we'll come back on notice on the exact financial details.
Thank you. Okay, well then moving on to the regional forest agreements. In particular, looking, Minister, you have received the independent reviewers report on the Tasmanian Regional Forest Agreement in December. It was for the period 2007 to 2012, so noting we're now in 2016.
Yes, well unfortunately, as you probably well know, Senator, we don't have a control over what the state governments choose to do or not do.
So look, I just wanted an update on what the planned process is from here on that agreement and the other regional forest agreements. Okay.
Well, obviously, as I mentioned in my throwaway remark before, that the state governments are the ones who have the jurisdiction over the delivery of the RFAs. We're working closely with the governments in Australia where RFAs apply. As you well know, they don't apply in a number of states. We have the response, the review back from Tasmania. We understand that the reviews from New South Wales and Western Australia are well underway, and in your home state of Victoria, we're still waiting to find out from the Victorian government as to when they'll be providing that review, because I understand that consequentially they're also looking at some issues in relation to the future of how they wish to deal with their forestry arrangements into the future, and they're running them concurrently. So we're still waiting advice from the Victorian government as to how they wish to progress in your home state.
So with the Tasmanian one then, where you've now got the independent review of it, so what's the timeline on action on the Tasmanian RFA?
Could I just check in? What's the statutory? I might just hand to the department because they'll have all the statutory time frames that are required.
Assistant Secretary of Forestry. So as far as Tasmania, as you know, the independent review has been completed. So we're working with the Tasmanian government now on the combined government response to that, and then the negotiation of the RFA. Because we need to get agreement between both governments, there's an expectation that it could take between 6 to 9 months. So they're hoping to get it done by mid-year, but at the latest, end of the year.
And the Tasmanian RFA, what's the timing on the expiry of that?
It's 2017, so as long as it's done this year, everything, we've got time for all of that. So that's Tasmania. Western Australia have just agreed on the scoping agreement, which is the agreement of the process for the independent review. So they're working with us at the moment to identify the independent reviewer, and then that process will happen. So Western Australia is on track, and theirs is due in 2019. So they're again expecting it to be completed, if not by the end of this year, early next year.
Okay.
You've had an update from the Minister on Victoria.
Well, I'd like to focus on Victoria, particularly the East Gippsland one, because that expires in just under a year. That was the
That's
first
true,
one.
February
So I'm just
2017,
interested
yes.
in what the process is going to be, given that expiry date.
Okay, well, at this stage, there's preliminary discussions being undertaken with the Victorian Government, and I'm probably not in a position to give you any more information than, obviously, it is a negotiation that has to be agreed between the Commonwealth and the Victorian Government. If the Victorian Government choose not to proceed within the timeframes that are statutorily required, then, probably the department can give you an indication of the triggers that follow from that. But as you probably well know, that if the RFAs aren't in place, then the situation reverts back to what the legislation would require of the Victorian forestry in the absence of those RFAs being in place. So I don't know whether there's anything further you want to add to that.
Not on Victoria, no.
No. Okay. Looking at the independent reviewers report for the Tasmanian RFA, we've had almost 20 years now of management of forests under RFAs, but the review is filled with statements such as, and I'll quote some of the statements here: assessment of the overall outcomes of the RFA for the conservation of biodiversity requires a greater commitment to appropriate research and assessment. Judging the overall success of threatened species management and the broader biodiversity outcomes under the RFA is difficult, given the limited monitoring outcomes. There is a need to build knowledge to determine the success or otherwise of the integrated land management approach to the RFA. It is not clear how some of the data adequacy concerns can be addressed. There is limited data in some areas and a lack of or declining resources available to collect data across a number of areas covered by criteria and indicators. And finally, sadly, that forest research in Tasmania reached a high watermark during the first 15 years of the RFA. The future outlook is much less encouraging.
Is there a question?
So, yes, the question is now coming, which is, how is I understand the proposed process to extend the RFAs going to take into account the absence of meaningful data that would indicate that native forest logging is in any way ecologically sustainable?
Okay, there's a whole heap of things that obviously feed into your very long preamble to the question. Obviously, the process of the RFA, because it allows the people that are on the ground to be making the decisions and providing the information about what's operating in Tasmania, and that's the reason we have these particular reviews that occur every 5 years. Obviously, the report informs what the new RFA will look like, and therefore the issues that you've raised in your preamble to your question obviously will inform what that RFA looks like. So I think it probably demonstrates to a large extent the value of the process that was put in place.
But how do you see a new RFA, I understand the government's intention is to roll them over for another 20 years, is going to address this fundamental lack of data that we have now experienced for 19 of the 20 years of the first RFAs. 19 years on, we're still being told, the independent reviewer is telling us there is insufficient data, insufficient monitoring. We can't assess whether ecologically sustainable forest management is a reality or a complete furphy.
Just one moment, Senator Rice.
Define furphy.
Well, something that's not proven.
As I sort of in reiteration to my comments on the answer to your previous question, many of the things, the purpose of these reviews is to inform further decision making, and in relation to your issues about the comments from the independent reviewer about the lack of data, obviously tells us that in the future RFAs that we need to address the research component of forestry, particularly. I'm assuming you're only talking about native forest.
Yes, native forest in particular.
Sorry.
Do the officers want to answer, or?
I was going to make the point that the reviewer's recommendations go quite a way to some things that could be improved in forest management. Some of them relate to transparency in the development of plans. They relate to engagement of various people in doing things, and they do call for further research. They're the sorts of things that will have to be taken into account in implementing the new RFA. The only other thing I could say is I'm relatively new to forests, but in all other areas of natural resource management, data and absolute knowledge about the resource you're managing is difficult to come by and expensive. So it's a matter of making sure we target the right sort of information that enables management decisions to be made. And they often don't have to be comprehensive information. It's good indicative information about what the behaviour is. So they are talking about, as the recommendation of the rules talk about, with the state, build better monitoring frameworks and those sorts of things.
My question is, we've had 19 years of doing that and we still haven't got there. So how can the community have any confidence that we're going to be any better in the next 20 years? It's probably a rhetorical question.
Yeah, look, and I think that the problem you have here is we're talking about a point in time, but we quite clearly this final review that we have before us is the one that will inform the decision in terms of the terms of the rollover of the RFA for Tasmania, and this is the whole purpose of this review, is to inform what goes on. Now, you can talk about anything that happens historically. I'm not in a position to comment on that. All I'm in a position to comment about is that I have the review, I have the recommendations, I have the concerns of the expert panel, and obviously they form part of the process to make sure that the RFA deals with the issues that have been identified.
Okay. The review concludes looking at concludes with reference to the objective of providing for future growth and development of Tasmanian industries associated with forest and timber products, that this has not been achieved for the native forest-based industry because of economic conditions and broad market force. And the other objective, it reflects of encouraging significant employment opportunities and investment throughout Tasmania, that this has not been achieved with significant reduction in the size of the native forest industry. So my question is, given this combination of things, will you, as part of your review process, at least consider the option of letting the RFAs gracefully expire and begin the full transition of logging out of native forests into plantations where 85% of the industry is already based?
Well, obviously you know the answer to that question before you even ask it. That we believe that there is a sustainable opportunity for forestry in Tasmania, not just in plantations. But if you're going to look at the last 20 years of forestry in Tasmania, there are a whole heap of things that have impacted on that that I think you'd have to consider were quite exceptional. I mean, the listing of quite a substantial area.
We surrender.
Sorry, I'm not going to surrender, Senator Heffernan. Senator, this is actually a really significant issue for the people of Tasmania, Senator Heffernan, mainly because their economic viability is vested quite substantially in the forestry industry. They have been through a tremendously traumatic time of the last 20 years, and it is a pretty significant issue for them, even if it may not be a significant issue for you.
Senator, could I just add something to an earlier question that might actually shed some light on this as well? You asked earlier on what was the income of Forest and Wood Products Australia. In 2015-16, they had an income of $9 million. $5.2 million was from industry levy contributions, with Commonwealth matching contributions of $3.5 million. The reason why the matching contributions are lower than the industry ones is the industry makes voluntary contributions. That industry can make a voluntary contribution clearly depends on the profitability of that industry, and legislation's recently been passed to enable Commonwealth matching contributions to be made to those voluntary ones. So as the profitability of the industry increases, they make voluntary contributions. That will provide better research information, some of which can go towards monitoring or improved management practices, including for native forests as well as plantations.
Yeah. In a situation where the profitable part of the industry is the plantation sector, that's increasing. Native forest logging is the rump of the industry. So I don't see why the government shouldn't just
Thank you,
accept the writing on
Senator
the wall.
Bullock.
Thank
You
you.
have the call.